From possessing no weaknesses as a fighter to being the best boxer in the UFC, here's why fighters are terrified of Dustin Poirier. Poirier being a complete package has got a lot to do with it. One thing about Dustin is that he doesn't slack in the octagon. He brings a lot to the table when brawling with his opponents. The Diamond's got his fair share of tricks in the cage. He can trap opponents with a sneaky counter right hook, hit them with a stiff hard jab, switch to southpaw, and land a loaded left hand. You name it. The 34-year-old athlete has a solid ground game. Let's not forget how he almost submitted Khabib at UFC 242. And let me tell you, it wasn't an easy task considering the Dagestani's grappling prowess. But Poirier is a force to be reckoned with in the cage. His Bravo choke is feared by fighters. The Louisiana native holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he makes good use of those skills in the octagon. His defense, on the other hand, speaks for itself. Yeah, that unorthodox guard and rock-solid chin can get frustrating for opponents to overcome. He's an all-rounder fighter with super skills in grappling, so it's no surprise that UFC fighters are terrified of him. Plus, those hands can do some real damage. Yeah, he's got the power to knock out his opponents like it's nothing.
Trying to make it uncomfortable for Anthony. Anthony trying to do a spin through, but control here from Dustin. Stays on top, gets mount.
Fans say that Dustin's got the heaviest hands in the lightweight and featherweight divisions. Yeah, most of his wins come via submission and decision, but don't let that fool you, because he's got everything he needs to knock you down. The Diamond made his UFC debut in 2010, and he's had over 10 knockout wins. And some of his best ones were TKOs, like his win over Eddie Alvarez at UFC Fight Night in July 2018. Poirier had some unfinished business with Alvarez when they stepped into the octagon.
And knee illegally in the head.
Okay, that's not legal.
But it's safe to say he got the closure he wanted. The Diamond landed a big knee and secured a second-round knockout win. I mean, Dustin's first victory in the UFC was against Zachary Micklewright via a first-round KO.
Zach Micklewright just setting him up, teeing off.
Look how his legs are bent. He's putting that power through the floor, through his legs, into his hands, just clean shots. Over and over.
So he definitely knows a thing or two about taking his opponents down. Let's just say that Dustin hits, and he hits hard. His KO against Justin Gaethje was one for the record books. This fight was hyped. That's all thanks to the heated rivalry between these two. Poirier really needed to get himself a win, and a fourth-round knockout got him exactly that. The rivalry between them only got worse with time. Yeah, they're facing each other again at UFC 291. These two have been taking shots at each other for quite some time now, and fans can't seem to get enough. Dana White knew exactly what he was doing when he paired these two to meet in the octagon. It'll undeniably be one of the biggest fights of this year. Both rivals are coming with fresh wins. Poirier over Michael Chandler and Gaethje over Rafael Fiziev. There's already too much drama between them. Justin thinks he's the most exciting fighter of all time, and Dustin obviously disagrees with him. Yeah, the Diamond thinks it's him instead. Poirier isn't one to go beefing around the internet, but when he does pick a fighter for some online feud, it's just as serious as it's scary. Trust me, you don't want to feud with Poirier because he will end you in the octagon. Justin better watch out because the Diamond is coming for him. The highlight is hungry for the win since he lost their first meeting in the octagon, but Dustin knows how to put on a real fight, and if those heavy punches don't land him a knockout, he can always go for a rear naked choke. Yeah, that's another reason why fighters are so afraid of Poirier. A rear naked choke is one of MMA's most lethal moves, and Poirier knows how to choke his opponents all too well. Yeah, Dustin's got his fair share of RNC wins throughout his career. Don't get me wrong, I remember how terribly Khabib choked him at UFC 242, but that doesn't mean Dustin can't choke his opponents in the cage. The outcome of 3 of his most high-profile fights was decided by the blood choke. I mean, his most recent win against Chandler was a submission win, all thanks to the choke. Every fighter in the UFC is terrified of this technique, and any fighter who knows a thing or two about it. When the Bravo choke isn't in the cards, Dustin goes for the rear naked. He's got everything in him to do it. Not only does he have super heavy hands, but he's one of the toughest the UFC has ever seen. I mean, he's called the Diamond for a reason. Poirier wasn't always the good guy he is today. He was actually a very troubled child who spent most of his time in detention. But even back then, he was the street boxing champion for his neighborhood. He's always had a love for fighting and putting on boxing gloves. Today, he's one of the greatest lightweights in the UFC. Like carbon changes to a diamond over time, Dustin's transformation from nothing to everything in the UFC make him the Diamond. He's put up some of the best performances in the octagon, and he's only fought the best of the best throughout his career. career, with wins over Conor McGregor, Max Holloway, and Jim Miller. According to Dustin, Miller was one of his toughest challenges, and he won Fight of the Night for that bout. So you can put the best fighter on the planet in the same ring as Poirier, and he'd put on his best show. All these wins prove that Dustin isn't one to be taken lightly, because he's only stepped into the octagon with top-ranked fighters. None of his wins can be taken as easier or losses as tougher. As if Dustin's heavy punches and tough physique aren't scary enough for fighters, his unpredictability in the octagon only adds to it. Yeah, Dustin isn't your average boring fighter. None of his fights in the UFC have been predictable for fans or his opponents. The MMA star shifts from southpaw to orthodox mid-combination. As a combination puncher, the Louisiana native creates openings for takedowns. Anytime his foes try to counter him as he shifts from closed guard to open guard, he ducks under their punches for a takedown. He did the same against Conor McGregor. Throughout his career, Dustin has earned 10 post-fight bonuses for performance of the night and fight of the night. That's not something you see on every fighter's record. On top of all his techniques and crazy skills, Poirier really knows how to transform himself for his fights. There's nothing more terrifying than a fighter who only keeps improving. The way he transformed himself after his first fight with McGregor is definitely for the history books. The Notorious got into Dustin's head when he knocked him out, but the Diamond didn't back down. He only came back stronger. The Louisiana native knew where he fell short and decided to move up a weight class. Fighting close to his natural weight felt right to him, and let me tell you, he was absolutely right. Moving to lightweight gave him the better half of his career. He absolutely reigned the weight class. This was one of the best transformations the UFC has ever seen. If you don't remember, Poirier was absolutely crushed after his loss to McGregor, and I guess it's safe to say he got his sweet revenge. Poirier won not one, but 2 fights against McGregor via TKO. Speaking of which, he also gave McGregor an almost career-ending leg injury. Okay, the Irishman might not agree with me on this one, but when he suffered his career-ending leg break in the octagon, it was actually by the hands of the man himself, Poirier, or at least that's what the Diamond said. Dustin told ESPN he fractured it on one of the checks at the beginning of the fight, then it broke on a punch for sure. Of course, fighters are going to be terrified of someone who's giving opponents career-ending injuries. McGregor has been laying low for almost 3 years now, but his leg is finally healed, and he's coming back to the cage later this year in 2023 against none other than Michael Chandler. The octagon isn't the only place where Dustin is scary, he's just as terrifying in the streets. Yeah, if I were you, I'd never take a joke too far in front of the Louisiana native, because that's exactly what happened at the Mardi Gras parade at Youngsville, Louisiana. A fan mocked Poirier's wife, and let me tell you, messing with his family isn't a good idea at all. The fan had a sign that said, "Your wife is in my DMs, learned it the hard way." The UFC fighter slapped him without thinking twice, and I'm sure he'll do it again if anyone comes for his family again. And if someone gets on his nerves too much, he'll land one of his heavy punches, and I'm sure it'll hurt like hell, because Poirier is one of the best boxers in the lightweight division right now. McGregor might be good at his kickboxing, but Poirier is reigning the game. You can't have a conversation about the best boxers in the UFC without mentioning him. Last year, in November 2022, a video of the UFC fighter boxing made rounds on the internet. Fans couldn't help but praise the athlete's crazy striking skills. There's no doubt he's the best out there, and fans will get to see more when he faces Gaethje in July 2023. So, from being the best boxer in the UFC to possessing no weaknesses as a fighter, this was why fighters are terrified of Dustin Poirier.